In today's world, staying updated on crucial events and news has become a huge challenge. From individuals to companies who are trying to meaningfully use this data, but with the recent AI advancements, we're making a groundbreaking strides in data analysis, engineering, and data collection. So we went from something like this to something like this. Alright, so what is Perigon exactly? At Perigon, we specialize in contextual intelligence, analyzing vast amount of real-time data to extract high-quality data points and insights. Our AI-driven solutions cater to everyone from AI enthusiasts, startups, companies, corporations, researchers, to government entities. So if you head over to goperigon.com, this is actually the web page or the landing page you're going to face. And the first thing you're going to see in here is actually the chatbot in here that is connected to real-time data. Unlike ChatGPT, this, if you just search on anything, you're literally going to get real-time, up-to-date responses and up-to-date insights. From the right-hand side in here, as you can see in here, we find stories that are currently going viral. And as you can see in here, like 6 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago. So all of these stories are actually are received in real time to make sure that we get the latest news. And all of them are properly handled using contextual AI. So using the Perigon Chatbot in here, you can actually use the pre-configured in here, pre-provided prompts if you would like to. Or for example, you can say something like this: oh, give me insights in comparison between the recent Tesla Model 3 performance and the Lucid Air. And it's basically like ChatGPT in here, but it's actually connected to real-time data, so it's up to date momentarily. And this is basically like the latest what you can get after that. For example, it's going to give you all the comparison between Model 3 performance and like the Lucid Air in here, what you should know about, what is actually happening. And the perfect part about this one is actually give you citations for the articles and sources it brought the data from. So like you can confirm that this is actually from a trusted source. For example, I can go ahead and check the actual price of the Lucid Air in here using this website where the article lives. If I go into it, there's actually a real website and the article actually does exist. And if you look into it, you're going to find, sources, different images, what's actually happening. And if you scroll down in here, you're going to find all the trusted sources. On the other hand, if you want to look into recent stories, for example, about this BMW, if you click on it, and on this page, you're going to find all the related data points and information about the story in here for BMW, from like the key points to the articles that made the actual story and the whole timeline. And likely for us, Perigon provides with more than 7 endpoints that we can access literally everything from like articles, stories, to different sources, maybe authors and journalists, people, or even topic and companies. So all of this, you can access it through one API endpoint and with simply a single API key. So before getting started with Perigon, you need to go ahead and create an account. So you can just go into the goperigon.com/sign up, and you're going to land in the sign up page, and you can put your first name, last name, email, and password. Or the easy part in here, you can sign up using Google, which I really love. And the same thing goes for login as well. All right, so once you're logged in, you're going to land in your dashboard in here, where you can basically manage everything about your account. But what we want specifically is actually to be able to access our API key so we can make our first API request. So you can go to the account in here, and you can clearly see here my API key in here. This is actually your API key. And of course, you have to keep it safe and not show it to anybody. Now, for API authentication, you can do it 3 ways. You can either do it through an API query parameter in here, which is API key, or send it as a header, which is the authorization bearer header, or simply as another header, x-API-key. I mean, I prefer the later two in here because they are more secure and they don't like expose your API key through the query parameters, but all ways are possible. So you can get started by making your first API request, and the easy part in here, you can copy this pre-made query in here or URL with your API key as a parameter. And as you see, API key is actually the API key in here. So all you simply do is just go ahead and copy this one, go to your preferred HTTP request software in here. For example, Postman is my preferred one in here. I can go back into make sure to choose a GET request, go ahead and paste that one in here. And if you just quickly notice, we're actually hitting the O endpoint. That means we're going through the articles endpoint. So if we go ahead and do send, it's immediately going to return all the recent articles from me, which means we got access to the API that easily. Alright, so to better understand every single API endpoint Perigon offers, you can actually head over to the documentation in here. So this will give you all the details if you want to read in details about guide, different examples and everything. But for a quick overview about how each and every single endpoint actually works, what is the response, and what are the parameters with really nice documentation in here, you can actually go ahead and access this simple Postman collection that is made public for everybody with every single API request that is available inside the API. So you can easily click on the Run in Postman button, and they'll take you in here to fork the collection. You click OK, and this will actually go ahead and fork the public Perigon collection for you. And once you're done forking that one, you're going to end up in your own collection in here with all the API endpoints to explore and test. So first, before you get started, you need to go ahead and authorize and put your API key that you just copied before from the dashboard. So you can go to the authorization tab in here. As curious in here, we're using this API key variable instead of Postman. So you need to go to the variables tab, and you see this like your Perigon API key. You put your API key right over there. So once you're done, let's say we're going to go ahead and actually do a query to our stories API. So you go v1 stories/all, and that's actually all the parameters that you can provide, from the query about the story to the name to literally everything. Let's say for the query, I want to explicitly search for electrical vehicles or EVs. And once I do that, I go ahead and click enter in here. It's actually going to go ahead and search for all the queries that has electric vehicles. And there you go. It's actually all the stories that are related to electric vehicles in here. For example, about this Honda. I'm going to keep scrolling and going to find like sentiments about this article or this specific story in here, like the countries, top countries, like the topics it's actually talking about, the different categories or subcategories, people that are mentioned through the story in here, like the different articles that made up the story, and all the contextual intelligence that you need. So you can go ahead and explore every single other API query in here, for example, from peoples to find different peoples or sources or journalists, or even topics in here to search for a specific topic. And next to every single API parameter in here, you're going to find a straight to the point description in here describing exactly what the parameter does and how it simply works. And if you ever want to know more details, you can actually go ahead and read through this like very detailed blog post that I wrote before about getting started with the Perigon API, from like creating an account to creating a fully fledged sort of React application using the Perigon API in our blog in here, like from goperigon.com/blog. And at the end of the blog post, you're going to find this really awesome code sandbox that actually explains and gives you a sample React application that is built on top of a Perigon API and the contextual intelligence. So for example, if you go ahead and actually open up this application, it's actually a very simple application. I really advise you to go ahead and look into it. You're going to find a link in the description below about this code sandbox in here. So you can go ahead and look into the code in here, see how it works, see how we are actually utilizing the Perigon API to filter out and search for specific stories about electrical vehicles. So the app in here works simply by putting your API key in here. So once you do, it's going to start searching for like stories or related stories about electrical vehicles using the stories endpoint. And I'm going to give you all the stories in here, the different articles. And if you ever want to feel like click one story, for example, the Mercedes story is going to give you a timeline of different articles that were used to make that story. And all the details in here, from example, for like the country, the author, the different companies that were listed on that article on the story, and even the actual article itself by just following up the link to take you to the actual article. So you can either access it through this code sandbox in here, or if you're more of like a GitHub sort of repository kind of person, want to run it locally, have this local version in here running using React with the Perigon API in here, you're going to find the whole repository in our GitHub, link description below. It basically like works the same thing in here, but it's actually built from scratch using React in here with a full code repository that is running from the ground up. So if you quickly take a look on how the code works and how we're actually doing the fetching part, fetching the data from the Perigon API. So for example, we got this method in here that is get stories. And we're simply just creating like this headers in here where we can append the X API key in here, providing our API key. So we put it as a header in here. Then we're simply using the fetch method to go ahead and fetch that one and pass in it the actual URL. So the URL, of course, is going to be API goperigon.com/v1, and we're going to access the stories endpoint. And for the queue in here, so we want to actually query for electrical vehicles, and I'm using the quote in here to specifically search for electrical vehicles as is. And I'm actually also using the expand articles sort of parameter in here to get the first 5 articles inside of the story for preview. And as simple as that, this JSON data in here, once we get the response from like response.json, we're going to get this JSON data. So the JSON data in here is going to have all the stories related to EVs or electrical vehicles. And of course, when we finish that, we're going to just use get stories in here. To get stories, we simply just go ahead and set the stories using the state in here, the set state in React. And of course, later on in here, once we fetch the stories, we just go ahead and loop through the stories and render every single story. I mean, as simple as that, as you basically render anything else you fetch from the API. Now, the awesome part about this one is actually it uses the React router DOM, of course, because when you click on something like this, for example, this story, it actually just go ahead and takes you to a completely different URL, a completely different page that is the articles or the story timeline, which lists the different articles for the specific story we clicked on. And here it's actually taking the ID of the story and just using it above there. So of course, we go into our stories timeline.gsx in here, we got this get story sort of method, where simply the same thing is going on. We're just passing the API key, and here we're passing this cluster ID, and the cluster ID is actually the cluster, and the cluster ID is simply just the story ID. Of course, again, we're just doing like stories in here, doing all expanding articles, and now, but instead of like passing the actual query, we want to access a specific story using the cluster ID or the story ID, just doing cluster ID equals the cluster ID. Now, of course, the cluster ID or the story ID, we use them and grab those from the parameters from the URL. So once we get the story ID, we just go get story, passing in the API key, the story ID, and we can get the target story. And as simple as that, we can go ahead and render our story object like story.name or story.summary and yada, yada, yada. And as simple as that, using contextual intelligence throughout the Perigon API, we were able to list and render the recent stories about electrical vehicles around the world, and also the ability to click on story, for example, on Tesla in here, and actually view the whole story timeline, like once it started, like 1 day ago, there's actually the article was posted. You basically get all the information that you need to validate and verify the truthness of that particular story. So anyway, guys, this has actually been a quick overview about Perigon and how to use the Perigon API and how to get started with it, and also how to build this very small React application. You're going to find all the links in the description below from the repository, the code sandbox, and the blog post. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Catch you all hopefully in an upcoming tutorial.